Hey you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. Today, we have episode 4 of the Castellammarese War. Last lunch for Joe. I didn't expect to do this many episodes, but I gotta give you guys the skinny, and I don't think anybody's broken it down like this before. And I do a lot of research, and when I get done that week, I give it to you. All right. So make sure you whack that subscribe button. Keep that subscriber gang under pressure. Break that thumb. Ring that bell. All right. Stay tuned to the end of the video. I got something for you guys. All right. Let's get into this. Castellammarese War, episode 4, Last Lunch for Joe. Giuseppe Masseria woke up on Wednesday, April 15th, 1931. He shaved, got dressed in a light gray three-piece suit by Vincent Barletta. He wore a white Madras shirt by Henry and Al in New York. Black leather belt with a silver buckle. Black Oxford shoes and blue cotton socks. Underneath it all, cream silk underwear. He waited for the knock on the door, letting him know that his armored car was outside waiting to take him to a meeting that was scheduled. He kissed his wife and headed out of the apartment building at 15 West 81st Street. It was an unusually warm day for this time of year. In fact, it was a record-setting warm day for the date. Who knows when the last time Joe got to see the sun? He had been in hiding since the death of his underboss, Giuseppe Morello. The war against the Castellammarese had not gone well for Joe the boss. At this point, he was hoping to get out of it alive. The meeting was either about more peace negotiations or planning meeting for a counter-strike. The restaurant where the meeting would take place was owned by Gerardo Scarpato, a man Joe knew, and the restaurant was named Nova Villa Tomaro, named after his mother-in-law and head chef, Anna Tomaro. Joe rode with two men to the Coney Island restaurant. What was going on in Joe's mind as they crossed the East River and made their way south through Brooklyn? Surely he wasn't thinking about getting whacked. He was Joe the friggin' boss, and he had been calling himself that before he became the actual boss. He was Joe the boss on May 8th, 1922, when Umberto Valente tried to kill him on Grant Street. He survived that. And he was Joe the boss on August 9th, 1922, when Valente ambushed him outside of his apartment. Valente chased him into a shop and fired at point-blank range, only killing Joe's straw hat. He survived that. They called him the man who could dodge bullets. They had been trying to kill him for 10 years, but he was Joe the friggin' boss. Joe's armored car pulled up in front of the Nova Villa Tomaro. He entered the restaurant with two men, and they were met there by a third. Maybe Joe didn't notice the restaurant was empty, and the only staff working that day was Gerardo and his mother-in-law. She served the men coffee and bread, and they ordered fish, so she left for the market. Gerardo Scarpato also decided that this was a beautiful day, and he needed to take a walk. At around 3 p.m., Joe and his companions were playing pinochle, possibly waiting for the person or persons he was meeting with. While outside, a blue sedan pulled up. Two men got out and entered the restaurant, walked up behind Joe, and shots rang out. 5 slugs slammed into Joe. The first one in the back of the head slumped Joe forward. 4 more plowed into his 5'10" portly frame at such a close range that they left burn marks in his jacket. Joe slumped to the floor. The 2 shooters left through the side entrance, tossing 2 .38 caliber pistols in the alley. The men who were with Joe quickly left the scene. Gerardo Scarpato returned to find Joe the boss no more. 4 hours after the shooting, the car used by the killers to escape was found abandoned at West 1st Street near Kings Highway, Brooklyn. About 2 miles from the Nova Villa Tomaro. On the back seat were 3 pistols. One lacked 2 cartridges, another had discharged 1 cartridge recently, and the third was fully loaded. The police arrived to find Joe Masseria stretched out on the restaurant floor. They also found 2 coats, left by the men who were with Joe when he was put on the spot, and presumably the ones who put him there. The coats belonged to Johnny Silkstock and Geistra, a gangster who operated on the Brooklyn waterfronts. He was part of the Mineo faction that stayed loyal to Joe after Mineo's death, and Frank Scalise went over to Maranzano. The other was Salveria Sam Palaccia. Palaccia was a good friend and maybe underboss to Frankie Yale. He was arrested in Chicago along with Frankie Yale for the murder of Dino Banyan in 1925. After Yale's death, he aligned himself with Masseria. A string of Masseria losses had elevated him in rank. Autopsy showed that Joe died on an almost empty stomach. Now, no news accounts from that time report anyone being there when the police arrived to give an account of what happened, despite what the history books say. And the history books say that Charlie Lucky was having lunch with Joe, and you know the rest. Long league, don't know what happened. Nick Gentile, who was a traveling gangster, most recently from Chicago, says that he was supposed to meet Joe at the meeting. But when him and Paul Ricca, who at the time was Capone's underboss, got there, he saw the cops and left. He said he went right to Charlie Lucky's apartment, just as Charlie was talking to one of the men negotiating peace with Maranzano. He said, "You tell Maranzano, we killed Joe, not for him, but for our own reasons." Joe Bonanno says that a week before Joe's demise, Maranzano met with Charlie Lucky and Genovese about Joe's removal. According to some accounts, Genovese and Charlie Lucky met directly with Maranzano and came to a mutual agreement. "Do you know why you're here?" Maranzano asked. The pair nodded in confirmation. "Good," Maranzano said. "I don't have to tell you what needs to be done." Before Maranzano excused him, he added, "I'm looking forward to a peaceful Easter." Gentile says, along with Vito Genovese, Albert Anastasia, Joe Biondo, Vincent Mangano, Paul Ricca, and others, met often in the hotel room, planning a coup. While Joe was getting dressed that morning, Anthony Carfagno was seen talking to Gerardo Scarpato in front of the restaurant. When he left, a friend of Scarpato's approached him. Scarpato told him to leave and not to say that he was there. It seems like everybody was in on the joke but Joe. The killing of Joe the Boss was national news. Newspapers all over the country, from small towns in Mississippi to Anchorage, Alaska, places that never even seen a big city gangster or had any idea who the Joe the Boss was, scrambled to get the scoop and sell stories. Some papers said it was Capone who had Joe the Boss killed because he was encroaching on his Brooklyn interests. Some papers said that Joe was an ally of Capone and even bigger than Capone. One paper said it was Al Wagner and his gang. Wagner was a Jewish dope dealer from the Lower East Side. I just found some really good stuff on him, and I'll be covering him and his brother in future episodes, okay? So, who hit Joe? We know that Sam Palaccia and Johnny Silk Stocking were there because they left their coats behind. But who was the third man? First of all, I want to point out the history books say, and the newspapers say, that Joe the Boss was with bodyguards. None of these men were so-called bodyguards. They were successful gangsters in their own right, and I wouldn't call them bodyguards. Now, back to the third guy. The third man may have been Vince Mangano. Now, this is my theory based on what I read. All right, this is my theory. Feel okay to leave your comment down below. It's all right. All right. Now, at this time, Coney Island was Mangano territory. South Brooklyn, waterfronts, was also the territory of Johnny Silk Stocking and Albert Anastasia. So, Joe may have felt comfortable meeting in the territory of an ally. And Mangano was a member of Frankie Yale's organization, and he was even credited for killing Wild Bill Lovett, Yale's enemy. Mangano was an ally of Joe, or so he thought. All right. Palaccia was brought in for questioning, but he denied knowing anything about the murder, despite his coat being left at the scene. Now, who actually pulled the trigger that ended Joe's life? Mob Law would throw several names out there as possible shooters. The usual suspects, so to say. They say Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Ben Siegel came in, lit Joe up, and got away with Cyril Terranova at the wheel. Now, this is the media or outsiders trying to figure out what happened using the well-known criminals of the day. Albert Anastasia had an airtight alibi, and he was at the office of lawyer Samuel Leibowitz. He made sure to ask the secretary what time it was, making sure that she didn't forget him. Can't speak for Bug or Vito. They were definitely capable, so maybe. But Cyril Terranova was in his 40s and a boss in his own right. Why would he be the getaway driver? I would think that you could do better as a getaway driver than Cyril Terranova for such a big hit. Adonis was a businessman, so I doubt it. What I'm saying is there were any number of men that were capable killers going around at the time. One of the men who gets mentioned in the killing of Joe was Carmelo Licante, another Brooklyn waterfront guy. Now, Licante was a partner of Johnny Silk Stocking, and since there were no witnesses, we'll never know. But maybe one of the guys that went with Joe went to the bathroom and came back blasting. It seems that somebody knew that Johnny Silk Stocking and Carmelo Licante were involved and wanted to avenge Joe, or Licante and Johnny Silk Stocking knew who was involved, and those people needed to silence them. Either way, 2 days after Joe the Boss was clipped, Carmelo LeConte and Johnny Silkstocking were riding in the backseat of a Cadillac driven by Ernest Hoppy Rawson. While they were driving down 68th Street in Brooklyn, a truck in front of them suddenly stopped, forcing Hoppy to slam on his brakes. The trio was sitting ducks. They were trapped when a car pulled alongside and shots rang out. 2 gunmen opened fire with shotguns. Hoppy was hit twice in the head and the neck. Johnny Silkstocking and Carmelo LeConte were able to escape and ran off. Again, Johnny Silkstocking left his coat and his hat. The day after his murder, his 24-year-old son, Joe Masseria Jr., identified the body in the Kings County morgue at Clarkson Avenue in Brooklyn. He had the body transported back to the family house. Joe Masseria was given a funeral befitting a gangster of his stature. A solid silver casket was said to have cost $15,000. 16 cars were needed to carry the thousands of wreaths. Although many were given anonymously, one, a heart of roses, was believed to have been sent by Al Capone. 69 cars made up the funeral procession, which left the penthouse and made its way to the Italian Church of Mary, Help of Christians, at 436 East 12th Street, for the Requiem Mass, held at noon by 3 priests. The funeral was attended by many of the gangsters who put Joe on the spot, including Charlie Lucky and Cyril Terranova. Joe was survived by his son, who the police thought may try to avenge his father, but apparently was not a hardcore criminal, and his 2 daughters, one of which 19-year-old Venetia died a few weeks later from an unknown illness. A few weeks later, on May 10th, Johnny Silkstocking and LeConte were summoned to a meeting. LeConte's car got a flat, so he sent Johnny to the meet while he stayed with the car. The meet was a setup. Johnny was found in the dirty hallway of a tenement on Monroe Street in Manhattan. He had 2 slugs, one from a .45 and one from a .38 pumped into his body. Johnny was able to pull his own pearl-handled pistol, but it was too late. It was found next to his hand. LeConte sought refuge in a hospital, but 2 months later, on July 10th, his body was found, beaten, stabbed, and slashed to death in the bathroom of a room at the Hotel Paramount on West 46th Street in Midtown Manhattan. Whether the murders of Johnny Silkstocking and Carmelo LeConte were because they had something to do with the Masseria hit, or because they were witnesses to the hit, or maybe they were making threats to the men who killed their boss. Who knows? Could be more house cleaning in Brooklyn. Because Vincent Mangano and Albert Anastasia took over Johnny Silkstocking's and LeConte's territory. Now, it's a little deeper than this. There's some inter-Italian stuff going on at this time between Calabrians and Neapolitans, and a bunch of Italians are going at each other based on where they're from back in Italy. So it's a little bit deeper than that, but that's the gist of it, and I'll break it down for you in another video soon. All right. After the killing, Gerardo Scarpato was scared shitless. After the murder of Joe the Boss, he went to the police and demanded to be fingerprinted. He told them that he was on the spot and he wanted them to be able to identify his body if anything would have happened to him. He went so far as to have his full name tattooed on the inside of his arm. He took his wife and they went on a vacation to Italy. In May, Maranzano held a meeting in Chicago where he buried the hostilities with Al Capone, and he declared himself Capo di Tutti Capi, boss of all bosses. He held a similar 3-day meeting back in New York on Coney Island. One of those meetings was at the same restaurant where Joe got clipped, where again he declared himself Capo di Tutti Capi, and he broke down the New York Mafia into the 5 families that we know today. Tommy Gagliano was given control of the former Rihanna gang. Frank Scalise was given control of the former Mineo gang. Joe Profaci got to keep his control of the former Clutching Hand Pereno gang. And Charlie Lucky was given control over the Masseria forces and named underboss to Salvatore Maranzano. All right, so that's where I gotta leave you guys off on this episode. All right, make sure you comment, like, and all that stuff. I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, make sure you make your bones. If you haven't already, bump off that subscribe button. If you want to slide an envelope upstairs to the boss, the link is down below. So, if you stayed to the end of the video, then you get the vote for the next video series. Okay? I'm going to stay in this time period though, 20s, 30s, because all of my blended stuff is in that period, and it would take a long time for me to do a whole nother period. All right? So you got 3 choices, 3 stories. All right? 3 stories I already got in the chamber, researched and all that. So I'm pretty much ready to go with any 3 of these stories. All right? So I could do Arnold Rothstein, the big bankroll, the big brain. All right, I haven't done a full video on him yet. I could do him. All right. Or I could do the Murder Incorporated story. All right. If you guys been here since the beginning, the first video I ever did was the Abe Rellis video, and it was taken down. So I could do the whole rise of Abe Rellis and the Murder Incorporated story. I got a lot of new stuff on that I like to share, so I could do that in a series. All right. Or I could do the Dutchman, Dutch Schultz. I haven't gotten to him yet either, so I've been holding back on Dutch. But if you want, I could do that. So leave your vote. I got one more episode of this Castellan Moraes series, and whoever has the most votes when the last episode drops will be the winner. Okay? So this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see yous in the funnies.